we were discussing about opportunities of collaboration, and I just came across this call for um, anthropologists actually by the UNDP, the United Nations Development Program,
Mhm.
and they are creating a network of innovation labs essentially that is startup accelerators across the globe.
Mm.
And they want specifically anthropologists as part of their teams. And so they are hiring in 60 countries or 30 countries um, for different positions where they want to create new accelerator programs.
Mm.
And one of the figures that they want is specifically anthropologists. And so I think that's a testament to how important that is. And they call this figure head of solution mapping, and so that's what they want anthropologists for, to map solutions and figure out different approaches to the world.
Yeah, awesome. That's a good bit of proof in the pudding there, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, it's so fascinating that now, because when you talked about anthropologists of the past, representing these like far more sometimes even not even thought about groups, that's where I think of a lot of more like famous
Yep.
anthropologists doing, let's say, African American studies, or the people who would go out to the distant places. And now, when you talk about looking at the groups within our current society and how they may be underserved, how has the role of the modern anthropologist changed, and where do you predict it's going to go in the future?
Yeah. Look, I think it has moved from being a study of different cultures to a study of cultures within cultures, and much more segmented understanding of different classes, gendered and ethnic perspectives on very familiar issues. And so even today, there are, in the Victorian government, one of the things they want to do is want to understand how Melbourne is a livable city.
Mhm.
And what, even in the public sector, they're very keenly aware of is the fact that it's not the same city for everybody, right? So if you are somebody living in Kew, maybe coming from an affluent and wealthy family, your experience of the city is very different compared to an international student,
Mm.
compared to somebody from North Macedonia living in the inner north suburb, or somebody living, in Sunshine, or somebody somewhere much further away. So depending on your background, your experience of a city is completely different. And so I think increasingly policymakers, companies are becoming more aware of the fact that we need this sort of granular understanding of the world around us.
Mm.
And that means that increasingly, with issues of automation, with issues of changing our contemporary world, understanding how we can interface with that, what that will do to us, will become particularly important.
Mm.
And I don't know if we'll ever see self-driving cars, but definitely in places like self-driving cars, self-driving, technologies, having anthropologists look at those products, look at how they impact our lives,
Mm.
that's really important. And I have a few colleagues at Monash, elsewhere as well, who have been specifically studying automated processes. I myself have been involved, or and hope to expand on the study of algorithms and how they impact um, various aspects of our lives, including social media. And so
Mm.
it's one of those things where we'll continuously create new technologies that are shaping the world around us, but we don't always understand how they actually affect us as people. We know how they affect some technical processes, but we then don't always understand what does that mean for us as
Yeah.
social lives and groups and people who live together.
Yeah, fascinating. And again, you're working in such a interesting time, right? Where not only
Mm.
have we got this worldwide socioeconomic change because of Corona, but you also have the advent of, well, you're living in the same era as a Mr. Elon Musk, who's going on about within 5-10 years we'll have Neuralink, and he's all of this information, right? So this is something that I'm so curious about. It seems like when you are an anthropologist, you study such huge topics. They're so impactful. It almost feels like I used to find it hard to study for diplomat, soldier, spy because I would study for it, right? And I'd be just like, oh my God, there's so much to think about. How are the algorithms, like, because you go from like China to then what's happening across the world in Africa. And it's like, suddenly, like whatever the hell else I was studying, like feels like, what on earth is this? Aren't you paying attention? But at the same time, like you said, most of the work is in these research processes. So how can anthropologists or people with a passion for anthropology go from studying impactful things to how to actually make an impact?
I think that's a hard question for everybody, not just for anthropologists. And the reason for it is, sometimes you think if you know how to code, then you can have an impact. But really, a lot of coding ends up being this very repetitive and manual thing. And so you sometimes think, man, I thought that by being an engineer, system engineer, I would be able to, I don't know, project the new or do the new satellites. But actually, all I do is like put together two very small components. And sometimes that is true also for anthropologists. You come out of it, you think, oh, I'm going to be able to shape the world, and you realize that shaping the world is actually very complex. And so we all want to change it for the better, but it's to get there, it takes a while, right?
More than 4 years.
So that's right. Exactly. And I was having this conversation a few days ago with somebody who's creating a platform for telling the stories of women who suffered domestic violence. And she says she's an entrepreneur, but what she's resisting is the idea that she can create a product that can solve everything. Because if there was a silver bullet for domestic violence, then there would be, it would be solved by now. And so I think the first thing to understand is it's going to take a little bit of time. And everybody needs to be comfortable with their own way of doing things. And so some people might feel that the best way to do it is by going into advocacy kind of role. And so a lot of our students tend to work in places like NGOs where they do maybe research on the field for them, or help them understand specific problems in, say, Africa. And if you have been in my class, you've seen some of the questions around malaria prevention and immunization prevention. Now those questions are sometimes thrown around in economic terms, which one is the most effective and most cost effective. But when you look at it from the perspective of the people who are going through it, you often have a completely different way of understanding the problem, right? And so often having anthropologists in this role is a very effective way to think about how can we make those lives better without only worrying about how much it costs, but worrying actually about the impact on the community there. So that's one route that people always find very useful. But increasingly, folks are finding that there is opportunities for shaping things also in private companies and in domestic governments as well. So you have folks that I work with and that often come to my design anthropology class that are coming from an anthropology background, working with consultancies or working with various kinds of companies that have been working with Intel, they have been working with Google or Facebook. Some of them work with this company called Forethought here in Melbourne, or another one called Paper Giant. And what they do essentially is that they help businesses see the perspective of their users and clients to change the culture of the business itself. And so they might be doing sometimes very specific studies about one product and how people react to that product, how different kinds of people think about that one product. But also they might be helping businesses rethink their own strategies, rethink their own culture, rethink how their business model should be articulated. And so those are just some of the ways in which people try to make an impact in the world coming out of anthropology.